You will not last a day because the envelope that keeps work possible collapses fast when wind passes 45 meters per second, about 87 knots, and waves build above 15 meters. In September 2004, as Hurricane Ivan crossed the Mississippi Canyon blocks north of the Sigsbee Escarpment, moorings parted and decks rolled through steep angles for minutes at a time. Under those loads, a simple handrail becomes a lifeline, a stair becomes a ladder, and every mistake compounds within one short shift. This narrative breaks the day into stress windows rather than hours on a clock. It follows water and food, shelter and heat, health and injury, work and lifting gear, law and emergency order, transport and evacuation, money and downtime, communications and weather data. The value is practical, thresholds and time gates that decide when people eat, rest, and leave. In the northern Gulf between 2004 and 2010, the shelf is shallow to the 100-meter contour, the pipeline grid is dense, and warm loop current eddies add energy to waves. One missed window of 12 hours turns routine fatigue into cascading failure. 3 fixed constraints frame the era. First, hurricane season runs from June through November, and in those years, storms like Ivan in 2004 and Katrina in August 2005 forced widespread shut-ins days before landfall. Second, logistics were helicopter first and boat second, with typical crew changes flying 150 to 300 kilometers over water. In rough seas, boat transit stretched beyond 6 hours. Third, standards were tightening, but not yet what they would become after Deepwater Horizon on 20th April 2010. Now, high-rate satellite feeds and continuous sensor backhaul are common. Then, many teams relied on sparser buoy networks and scheduled briefings rather than minute-level updates. Regulatory and technical baselines also mattered. The Oil Pollution Act of August 1990 set liability and spill planning that shaped every shutdown decision 2 decades later. The American Petroleum Institute, API, would publish Standard 53 on blowout preventers in 2012. In our window crews worked to earlier company rules and inspection rhythms, while the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BSEE, had not yet issued its well control rule that arrived in April 2016. In practice, today, a supervisor might lean on codified remote monitoring and documented simulator drills, then more depended on local checklists, radio discipline, and the judgment of one tool pusher watching pressure climb 1 bar at a time. The first thing to fail is intake. On a shallow shelf platform north of the Mississippi River Delta, the first storm watch in September 2008 pushed wind above 30 meters per second by nightfall, and the deck began to heave. Within 6 hours, cooks rationed potable water to 2 liters per person, and galley doors stayed latched. At that pace, the margin was thin. A single spill across the pantry floor could double waste. The experience was not dramatic, it was cumulative. Food handling slowed, people moved with caution, and appetite fell while the storm window narrowed. Potable water lived in welded steel tanks, sized in tens of cubic meters, topped up by a compact reverse osmosis unit that lifted salt water through membranes at a few thousand liters per day. With 60 people aboard, the arithmetic left less than 3 days of comfortable headroom if generation faltered. When roll exceeded 8 degrees, the suction line gulped air for seconds and pumps tripped. The fix took minutes, but the restart came with stress. Each stop added salinity spikes that pushed treatment toward its limits. Food supplies were a function of distance and sea state. Helicopters brought people, but dry goods and fresh produce came by crew boat across 100 to 200 kilometers of water. In calm weather, that meant 6 hours pier to platform. In a swell over 4 meters, the boat diverted or waited. Instead of daily top-ups, galleys planned 7 to 10 days ahead. This lowered transport risk but raised storage risk. When idle time stretched past 30 hours, lettuce browned, fruit bruised, and soft bread turned to waste. The machinery that protected water was sensitive to what storms stirred up. Spray carried fine oil film from routine deck operations and natural seeps. In June 1979, the Ixtoc-1 blowout in the Bay of Campeche showed how fast hydrocarbons spread across hundreds of kilometers when currents ran north. That history shaped habits a generation later. Operators added cartridge filters ahead of membranes and kept drum stock of powder disinfectant. It reduced biological risk, but increased the chance of clogged elements when sediment surged. One small example showed the logic. In September 2008 on South Timbalier Block waters, a steward sealed 60-kilogram sacks of flour inside lined drums and moved 24 20-liter water jugs to a higher deck. The work took 25 minutes across one graded stairwell during a lull. It cut loss from spray to near zero when the next squall hit. It cost time and muscle, but bought a day of bread and coffee. That simple action preserved morale when noise and roll eroded sleep. Cold chain discipline fell under diesel math. Freezers held at minus 18 degrees Celsius, chillers at 4 degrees Celsius. When wind forced non-essential loads offline, the chief engineer prioritized compressors and navigation lights. Each generator burned several hundred liters of fuel per day under storm load. If a fuel transfer pump hesitated for 15 minutes during heavy roll, pressure alarms followed, and temperatures drifted upward. In 12 hours of marginal power, thaw reached outer layers, and refreezing later did not undo the damage. Human tolerance eroded even faster than stores. At roll above 10 degrees and persistent pitch, seasickness reached half the crew despite tablets. Vomiting cut net hydration by a liter or more in a shift. Coffee and salt crackers helped some, but the combination of noise above 90 decibels and diesel odor reduced appetite. The body asked for simple carbohydrates and water and got sticky rice, canned fruit, and rationed sports drink. Within 18 hours, errors crept into counts and labels. By the second day, the scoreboard favored the storm. Water remained, but at a lower comfort margin. Food existed, but in simpler form, and preparation took longer minutes under straps and non-skid mats. Nothing looked like a headline, yet the system bent toward fatigue. Intake under target meant lower core temperature on rest, slower recovery on work, and a shorter fuse on judgment. That is why people tend to fail here early. The next failure mode sits one compartment away, where shelter, temperature, and microclimate decide whether rest actually restores. Shelter fails quietly before it fails visibly. In September 2008, as Hurricane Ike drove north across the shelf, A fixed platform west of the Mississippi River Delta sealed its shutters and shifted to storm ventilation within 1 hour. The action held water back, yet wind-driven spray forced through hairline gaps and raised humidity above 80% by midnight. Bunks felt tacky, cabin doors stuck, and rest cycles shortened to 90 minutes. Sleep debt started while the storm still climbed, and the next shift stepped onto deck with slower reaction time and a tighter margin. Living quarters relied on positive pressure and dry air more than on thick steel. Air handling units pushed a steady overpressure near 50 pascals, enough to keep salt and exhaust out of stairwells. Under normal load, they held cabins near 24 degrees Celsius and 50% humidity. When generator frequency wavered for even 5 minutes, fan speeds dipped and warm air seeped along cable trays. The numbers looked small, yet bodies noticed. Core temperature rose after each meal, and recovery between tasks slipped by 20 minutes or more. Water found shortcuts that maintenance crews knew by length and sound. A welded seam 3 centimeters off level on one bulkhead let a thread of water reach a lighting channel in under 2 hours. The fix was simple tape and a rag, but the effect was cumulative. Linens took on an extra 5% moisture by the next rest block. By dawn, 8 mattresses needed rotation to drier edges. In practice, the routine consumed 40 minutes of 2 stewards' time, which shifted breakfast by the same measure and compressed the handover window. Noise turned rooms into poor shelters, even when the walls held. With wind above 30 meters per second, structure-borne vibration kept a constant tone near 90 decibels in several cabins. Earplugs provided about 20 decibels of relief, but pressure pulses still woke people. A hand on the bulkhead felt a beat every few seconds as waves met braces. After 6 interrupted cycles, deep sleep time fell by half. The next watch drank more coffee and stretched longer under red lights, which delayed maintenance and moved faults into hotter daylight hours. The safe room was not comfortable by design. During Ike, a crew on a South Marsh Island block moved 20 people into a temporary refuge rated for 30. The door closed and carbon dioxide climbed above 1,500 parts per million within 2 hours, even with a small scrubber running. Headaches appeared, and heart rates rose by a few beats per minute. The room did its job as a life preserve, but it was a poor place to rest. When the all-clear sounded, the group stepped out slower and less sharp. Air conditioning rode on diesel math and triage. Each chiller pulled several tens of kilowatts, and each generator burned hundreds of liters of fuel per day under storm load. When a transfer pump paused for 15 minutes during a heavy roll, one chiller tripped, and cabin temperatures in the forward stack drifted to 29 degrees Celsius. Condensation formed on cold ductwork and dripped onto lockers. A single breaker reset fixed the immediate issue, yet the moisture remained. Later, a corroded contact caused another unscheduled stop. Salt and microbes worked on the inside surfaces the way spray attacked the outside. Filters at the fresh air intakes loaded faster, turning from light gray to dark within 24 hours. The change cut airflow by a third if no one swapped elements. In that same window, fine salt left a film on tiles and ladders, and every step pulled dampness into socks. Skin softened and blister risk rose during the next shift. The body cooled quickly when wet air moved, which pushed some workers toward mild hypothermia during short rests under vents. All this bent the microclimate away from recovery. The shelter kept people alive, yet it did not restore them to baseline. Temperatures drifted, humidity climbed, noise grew, and oxygen debt accumulated behind sealed doors. By the 20th hour, the probability of error during a simple task like climbing a 6-meter stair rose sharply. That is why shelter is the second early failure mode. The next stressor follows from tired bodies in moving steel. Health and injuries grow from small slips, and storms turn small slips into real incidents. Health begins to fray within the first storm cycle. During Hurricane Ivan in September 2004, a crew north of the Mississippi Canyon reported continuous roll above 8 degrees for 6 hours and wind near 30 meters per second. Under that motion, minor slips became knee twists and ankle strains. Reaction time stretched by seconds and grip strength fell as forearms tired. The medical lead moved ice packs and elastic wraps to the galley to cut response time by 10 minutes, a small change that kept people walking but did not restore capacity. Falls dominated early incidents because ladders and stairs turned into moving targets. Standard lanyards in fall arrest measured about 2 meters, with anchor points spaced every 3 to 4 meters along walkways. A rigger crossing a 6-meter stair in September 2008 clipped high, paused 3 times, and reached the landing in 90 seconds instead of 30. He did not fall, but he arrived with a calf strain that needed rest and anti-inflammatory tablets. The delay protected bones, yet it pushed routine tasks into darker, wetter hours with no extra hands. Eyes and skin took spray and grit long before heavy objects struck. Gusts above 25 meters per second drove salt crystals under eyelids and turned safety glasses into fogged plates within minutes. Face shields helped during grinding and cutting, yet they channeled water toward collars. An eye wash station delivered a 15-minute flush at low pressure, which was mandatory after each suspected exposure. In one short case, a mechanic rinsed twice in one shift and missed 40 minutes of work, which shifted a pump restart into the roughest part of the night. Crush and pinch injuries rose when crane hooks swung. Tag lines of 10 to 12 meters gave control until gusts lifted loads sideways. Dynamic loads approached twice the static weight when the hook dropped into a trough. A crane operator on Eugene Island blocks paused a lift of a 200-kilogram valve for 20 minutes until gusts slowed below 20 meters per second. The schedule slipped, yet no fingers were caught between pad eyes and flanges. The trade was clear. Less progress, fewer hand injuries, more open tasks waiting for a narrow weather window. Heat and hydration slid under the radar inside personal protective equipment, PPE. Ambient air during late summer held near 30 degrees Celsius, with dew points above 24 degrees Celsius. Wet bulb globe temperature, WBGT, pushed rest cycles toward 15 minutes work and 45 minutes cool down for heavy tasks. Some ignored the chart and stayed out for an extra 10 minutes. Heart rates rose, sweat salt loss reached a liter per hour, and the next steps became clumsy. Electrolyte packets helped, but only if used on schedule and not after dizziness began. Cuts infected faster when water was dirty. Storms stirred sheen from decks and natural seeps into sumps. The Ixtoc 1 blowout in June 1979 proved how hydrocarbons spread far across the Bay of Campeche and northward with currents, leaving dermatitis and eye irritation in their wake. Crews 3 decades later disinfected wounds with povidone iodine and kept a chlorine dose near 2 to 4 milligrams per liter for rinse water. That cut bacterial load, yet hands softened in gloves and reopened small cracks during the next watch, extending the healing window by days. Evacuation depended on aircraft limits, not on desire. Many operators kept helicopter flights on hold when steady wind exceeded 25 meters per second or when ceilings fell below safe heights. A typical medical run covered about 150 kilometers, roughly 80 nautical miles, from platform to a coastal clinic in 90 minutes with loading. In one case during September 2005, a deckhand with chest pain received aspirin, oxygen, and monitoring from an automatic external defibrillator, AED. He stabilized, but liftoff waited 3 hours until gusts eased, adding real risk to a survivable event. By 2009, the International Maritime Organization updated its mobile offshore drilling unit code, which pressed drill units towards stronger temporary refugees and clearer medical spaces. Fixed production platforms often stood outside that code and leaned on company rules and local training instead. After Katrina in August 2005 and Rita in September that same year, more than 100 structures were lost, and medevac queues lengthened along the coast. The lesson was blunt. Injuries that were minor onshore accumulated offshore under motion, heat, and delay, priming the next failure mode in work, tools, and lifts. Work changes character when wind climbs past 20 meters per second and gusts push loads sideways. On a fixed platform east of Vermilion Bay during September 2008, crane lifts shifted from routine to restricted within 30 minutes. The safe working load, first spelled in metric tons and then in short tons, stayed the same on paper, yet dynamic amplification doubled peak line tension when a hook fell through a 2-meter trough. Supervisors imposed a hard pause at 22 meters per second and cut the lift plan in half, which traded schedule for intact fingers. Rigging underspray ran on small parts that failed the day. Wire rope slings of 20 millimeters worked well at rest, but salt added a thin abrasive that grew into broken wires after 12 hours. Bow shackles of 16 millimeters with a working load near 3 tons needed fresh pins and cotters, not reused ones from the tray. Tag lines of 10 to 12 meters gained mass when wet, which slowed hands by seconds. Each change looked minor, yet the combined effect moved a 4-hour sequence into a 6-hour window and raised fatigue across the shift. Securing the deck before the eye wall passed consumed more time than new work. Lashings on oxy-fuel racks went from 1 strap to 2, and tool trunks gained an extra chain. A storm pack for 1 bay took 15 minutes in calm weather and 30 in roll, above 8 degrees. Hot work permits closed at once, and grinders went to lockers. A 6-meter walkway that a rigger crossed in 30 seconds now took 90 with 3 clips on a lifeline. The cost was lost tasks, yet the benefit was fewer loose objects during the night. Heavy tubular handling exposed limits that numbers made clear. Drill pipe joints of about 9 meters weighed several hundred kilograms each, and stands reached near 27 meters when racked back. The traveling block saw tens of tons of load, and Crown Saver alarms were checked twice per tour. Iron roughnecks and tongs delivered tens of kilonewtons of torque, but open derrick windage added sway that exceeded normal damping. When roll passed 10 degrees, crews laid down pipe instead of racking back. That choice 8 hours, but prevented a drop stand. A short case showed the shape of caution. In September 2004, on a Mississippi Canyon production deck, a 200-kilogram pump casing arrived by boat and shifted under a gust. The banksman called stop, swapped a single tagline for a 12-meter pair, and asked the crane to reboom 3 degrees. The new arc took 3 minutes more, and the landing was clean with 0 hand strikes. The delay pushed a flange makeup into darkness, but the crew finished with intact gloves and a clear record for that round. Tool reliability under storm load was not an abstract value. On drilling units, the blowout preventer, spelled once then shortened to BOP, carried hydraulic circuits with pressures in the tens of megapascals and closing times measured in seconds. On 20th April 2010 at Macondo, Deepwater Horizon lost the well, and investigators later mapped how layered controls did not converge under stress. In the Northern Shelf years earlier, crews treated BOP tests and valve drills as anchors in a week. Each past test bought confidence, yet none canceled the human cost of tired hands. Maintenance gates narrowed under salt and motion. Lockout-tagout, LOTO, took 5 to 10 minutes per point in calm air and twice that in spray. Torque checks on structural bolts hit values of hundreds of Newton meters, but wet threads fooled some wrenches and forced retests. Portable radios that ran 16 hours on a charge delivered half after repeated traffic. When a relay chattered for 15 minutes from vibration, a motor control center tripped and the crane went dark until a reset. Every reset added risk and shifted work into the next squall line. By the second day, the curve bent away from safe lifting. Dynamic loads rose, riggers slowed, and simple tasks drifted into poor visibility with fewer minutes of rest behind them. The probability of a dropped object or a finger pinch climbed with each extra clip and each wet glove. That is why work, tools, and lifting operations rank as an early failure path in storms. The next barrier is not steel or rope, but rules, authority, and rhythm. Law, order, and emergency procedures decide who stops what, when, and for how long. Order holds the line until wind and swell move it. After Katrina in August 2005 and Rita in September that same year, a fixed platform east of the Atchafalaya Delta shifted to storm authority within 30 minutes of steady wind above 35 meters per second. The incident commander onshore took control. The offshore installation manager executed the plan, and musters began. People had 10 minutes to report and confirm persons on board. Every late check triggered a compartment search and cost another 10 minutes of exposure before locks and shutdowns. The command spine followed the Incident Command System, spelled once and shortened to ICS. Roles were simple and strict: Incident Commander, Operations, Planning, Logistics, and Safety. A general alarm sent everyone to muster stations with T-cards and head count tags. The target was full count in 5 minutes and a second verification in 10. Fail the second check and teams opened doors in pairs with radios and lifelines. That kept search time contained, but it delayed other steps like blowdown and isolation until everyone was found. Emergency shutdown, spelled once and shortened to ESD, ran in levels. Level 1 isolated process areas and stopped pumps within 1 minute. Level 2 vented and blew down to flare, dropping pressure by tens of bar across separators in minutes. Gas detectors watched parts per million and percent of lower explosive limit. Nuisance trips rose when spray carried salt into housings, but overrides were rare. A wrong override saved minutes and raised risk. A clean trip cost volume and time, yet it created a stable deck to survive the next squall. The Oil Pollution Act of August 1990 sat behind many storm choices. Liability ceilings and planning standards pushed operators to shut in early when forecast tracks crossed the shelf. A single platform might produce a few thousand barrels per day, but a spill turned volumes into fines and cleanup days. After Katrina and Rita, more than 100 structures were lost, and unmoored units damaged pipelines across hundreds of kilometers. Company rules tightened as a result. Early shut-in reduced revenue, but it lowered exposure under a law that had sharp teeth. Stop work authority moved from policy to practice when weather built. In September 2008, during Ike, a floor hand on Eugene Island blocks called stop as a gust swung a 100-kilogram spool above a handrail. The banksman agreed, and the crew reset tag lines to 12 meters and waited 10 minutes for steadier wind. The lift finished with no fingers near flanges. Work slipped past sunset by 20 minutes, but the record stayed clean. The authority added delay, and it also cut the number of strain and crush cases that start cascades. Code set the refuge and abandonment baseline, even when the storm window was narrow. The 2009 International Maritime Organization Mobile Offshore Drilling Unit Code clarified temporary refuge endurance in hours and ventilation rates per person. Production platforms mirrored parts of that guidance in company rules. Later, the 2012 American Petroleum Institute Standard 53 codified blowout preventer testing. The Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement Well Control Rule of April 2016 hardened drills. In our period, crews bridged older and newer steps with extra local checks. Security and discipline mattered under motion. Dry policies removed alcohol from the risk set, and random checks backed that line. Permits to work closed in stages as wind rose from 20 to 30 meters per second. Hot work stopped, confined space entries ended, and simultaneous operations paused. Each closure step took minutes and signatures. A permit that closed late kept people in poor locations during bad minutes. A permit that closed early preserved options for shelter. The trade favored caution because evacuation options were not always ready. By the second storm day, law and order held operations together, but it also slowed motion across the deck. Confirmations, searches, and shutdowns used the same small pool of rested people. That raised the chance that transport and evacuation would become the next limit when windows opened. Helicopter rules set thresholds in wind, visibility, and ceiling, and boats met their own sea state gates. The process kept risk bounded, yet it pushed movement into short slots across long distances. The next chapter follows that route from deck to shore. Movement off the platform narrows to short weather gates. During Hurricane Rita in September 2005, a production deck south of Vermilion Bay closed its helideck by late morning when steady wind climbed past 25 meters per second and crosswinds shifted. Crew boats already faced 4 to 6 meter waves along 150 to 200 kilometers of route. Within 3 hours, all non-essential travel paused. The line from deck to shore shortened to emergency only, and every later decision borrowed risk from the next window. Helicopters carried the fast path when limits allowed. A typical twin-engine rotorcraft of the era lifted 9 to 12 people with fuel for 300 to 400 kilometers and a legal reserve. Operators held flights when sustained wind exceeded roughly 25 meters per second or when ceilings fell below a few hundred meters. On a hot late summer day, density altitude trimmed payload by tens of kilograms. Each kilogram lost pushed one more bag to the deck and sometimes one more person to the next slot. Instrument flight rules kept options alive, but did not erase physics. Offshore instrument departures and arrivals used waypoints and radio beacons that worked well in steady air. In squalls, sideways shear near 20 meters per second, spoiled approaches, and forced missed landings. Visibility that read 2 kilometers on a sensor could fall to hundreds of meters in driving spray within minutes. A captain might make 2 passes and divert to a standby base 50 to 100 kilometers west, adding an hour while the platform waited under rising seas. Boats moved volume when seas allowed and stopped hard when they did not. Fast supply vessels with dynamic positioning Class 2 could hold station in 3 to 4 meter seas, but safe personnel transfers still required a lull. Basket moves with a Billy Pugh-style net carried 4 to 8 people per lift and needed 2 taglines of about 12 meters. In September 2008, a crew boat turned back after 3 hours toward Eugene Island when wave period shortened and decks took green water. The platform waited another 24 hours for the next shot. Search and rescue, spelled once and shortened to SR, added reach but not certainty. United States Coast Guard sectors in New Orleans, Houston, Galveston, and Mobile launched helicopters with ranges of several hundred kilometers. A Dolphin-class aircraft could hoist about 270 kilograms from a deck, but rotor downwash and swinging loads near flare booms raised hazards. A Jayhawk-class aircraft brought longer legs and more fuel. Crews often staged at coastal air stations and leapfrogged fuel points when storm tracks pushed far from shore. Evacuation followed a timeline measured back from landfall. Non-essential staff left 24 to 48 hours ahead when forecast cones crossed the shelf. After Katrina in August 2005 and Rita in September that year, hundreds of platforms cleared and a large share of production shut in for days. During Ike in September 2008, one operator flew Sikorsky-class aircraft from Galveston to Lafayette to dodge crosswinds and held a medevac 3 hours until gusts eased below set limits. The patient remained stable because oxygen and monitoring were ready. Lifeboats and rafts were last lines, not shortcuts. Covered twin fall boats carried tens of people with small diesel engines and rations sized for 3 days at minimal intake. Hydrostatic releases freed rafts when submerged a few meters. Emergency position indicating radio beacons transmitted on 406 MHz and marked position within 1 to 2 kilometers to satellites and rescue centers. In rough seas, entry alone consumed minutes and energy. Dry suits were rare on warm shelf units, so spray and wind chill still stole heat during a long wait. By the second storm day, transport ran on narrow gates and long holds. Helicopters met wind and ceiling limits, boats met sea state and period limits, and SR added coverage with its own fuel math. Each missed slot pushed people deeper into fatigue and kept injuries and maintenance on board. That pressure set up the next constraint. Every hour of waiting burned diesel, rented hulls, and lost output. The following module turns from movement to money, downtime, and penalties that compound when weather holds the line. Money bleeds first as output stops. A small shelf platform north of the Mississippi River Delta that makes 5,000 barrels per day turns into a cost center the moment wells are shut in. At $60 per barrel, that is $300,000 of gross revenue lost every 24 hours before royalties and lifting costs. When Hurricane Ike approached in September 2008, some operators shut in 48 hours early to meet procedures. 2 days of safety margin protected people, yet it erased $600,000 per asset and moved crews into longer idle cycles. Contracts lock the burn rate even when tools sit still. A jack-up rig on a workover day rate near $150,000 per day continues billing on waiting on weather, spelled once, and shortened to WOW, often at 70% of full rate. A semi-submersible in deeper water might sit at $400,000 per day with similar clauses. Every extra hour of swell that keeps a crane idle converts into thousands of dollars of non-productive time, spelled once and shortened to NPT. The math beats optimism and pushes managers to close plans early. Logistics add a steady drain even as movement pauses. A twin-engine helicopter of the Sikorsky class burns through several hundred liters of jet fuel per hour and bills near $3,000 per flight hour on dedicated charters. A fast supply vessel with dynamic positioning Class 2 runs near $15,000 per day plus fuel, and heavy seas drive consumption upward by hundreds of liters per hour. In one Ike case, a crew boat staged 6 hours against 4-meter seas and returned to port, spending a day rate and fuel without moving a single pallet. Insurance moves quickly from safety net to friction. Named storm deductibles along the northern Gulf often sat between 2 and 5% of the insured value. A living quarters module insured for $10 million carried a deductible between $200,000 and $500,000 per event. Business interruption coverage usually started after a 72-hour waiting period, which meant a 3-day shut-in produced no payout. After Katrina and Rita in 2005, premiums rose by double-digit percentages, and some deductibles climbed by another point. Damage below the surface raises the bill faster than a broken handrail does. Pipeline spans laid across the shelf needed remotely operated vehicle, ROV, inspection at $30,000 to $60,000 per day, and anchor handling tug support that could run $80,000 to $120,000 per day. A single scoured span near a mudline crossing could take 2 to 4 days to isolate, pig, and patch. After Ike in 2008, dozens of crossings required surveys across hundreds of kilometers, and inspection queues stretched into weeks of added NPT. Penalty exposure ties weather to law. Under the Oil Pollution Act of August 1990, removal costs were uncapped, and damages carried limits that were still large for a small operator. Civil penalties under clean water rules often started above $1,000 per barrel and climbed higher with aggravated findings. During our window before the well control rule of April 2016, companies leaned on internal barriers and drills. After Deepwater Horizon on 20th April 2010, enforcement pressure increased. That shift turned every near miss into a financial risk line on a morning call. People cost money even when they sit and wait, and fatigue multiplies the tab. Offshore tours often ran 12-hour shifts on schedules like 14 and 7 or 21 and 7. Overtime rates at time and a half applied when weather stretched handovers by hours. Hazard pay added a small percentage during named storms. In September 2005, one crew held 3 extra days offshore because helidecks were closed, adding dozens of paid shift hours per person and pushing hotel and bus costs onshore into the next week for the delayed changeout. A short case shows how numbers shape choices. On South Timbalier blocks during Ike, a superintendent weighed a $150,000 WOW day on a jackup against a forecast window of 12 hours with gusts above 25 meters per second. He called a pause, accepted the partial day loss, and prevented a late lift that might have damaged a $200,000 pump skid. The ledger looked worse that day and better that month. The system still leaked money, and it leaned harder on decisions made with sparse data. That pressure brings the next constraint into focus, because without reliable communications and weather information, costs and risks both move in the wrong direction. Communications break before steel does. During Hurricane Ike in September 2008, a deck west of the Mississippi River Delta lost its primary, very small aperture terminal, VSAT, lock each time roll exceeded 8 degrees, and rain bands thickened. The beam searched for seconds, then minutes, and bandwidth collapsed from megabits to brief bursts. Very high frequency, VHF, radio nets filled as crews called checks every 15 minutes. Messages queued, repeats 8 times, and weather plots arrived late. Decisions shifted from data to hunch as the wind climbed. Satellite links in that era lived on Ku-band and on narrow L-band backups. The main dish near 1.5 meters worked in clear air, then faded when rain rate passed tens of millimeters per hour. Crews fell back to Inmarsat terminals with shared channels and delays near 600 milliseconds. Email became plain text, images arrived as single frames, and voice prioritized overrides. Supervisory control and data acquisition, SCADA, trends uploaded in batches. Gaps of 10 to 15 minutes hid pressure steps that would have guided calmer shutdowns. Meteorology flowed through thin pipes. The National Data Buoy Center, NDBC, fed wave and wind from moorings hundreds of kilometers away. The Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite, GOES, delivered cloud-top loops at intervals of 15 minutes or more. On a moving deck, those updates felt slow. A squall built and rotated in 5 minutes, then cleared. A still frame lagged behind by 1 loop. Operators annotated maps by hand and relayed headings by voice. The mismatch turned fast physics into late paperwork during bad hours. Coastal radar added reach, but not certainty. Next generation radar, NEXRAD, painted rain fields out to 200 to 300 kilometers, then left a blind band over the outer shelf. Beam height grew with distance, so low cells near rigs slipped under the scan. During Rita in September 2005, a crew north of Eugene Island waited for a clean sweep and saw only pale echoes. The banksman trusted wind on the cheek and called hold for 15 minutes. When the burst passed, visibility doubled and the lift finished without a scrape. Local radio carried the workload and suffered for it. Handheld sets ran at 4 to 5 watts and relied on repeaters tucked in steel rooms. Very high frequency carried boat traffic, while ultra-high frequency, UHF, handled deck talk groups. In Spray, speaker mics clogged, and batteries that lasted 16 hours in calm air sagged to 8. One example from Mississippi Canyon showed the fix. A technician swapped a repeater to a backup channel and issued spare packs at muster. The change took 5 minutes and cut missed calls to near zero that night. Power quality governed whether networks stayed alive. Server closets held small, uninterruptible power supply (UPS) stacks with about 15 minutes of ride-through. When a generator tripped for 3 minutes under a fuel transfer hiccup, routers rebooted and timestamps drifted. Data loggers dropped 30 minutes of history, then stitched files out of order. The rebuild stole another 10 minutes as drives checked integrity. Voice returned first, then charts, then control screens. None of it broke equipment, yet every pause ate the safest slots for movement. Sensors failed high, low, and sideways. Cup anemometers stalled when spray froze bearings with salt, and sonic heads spiked in gusts above 40 meters per second. Crews reverted to visual sea state and handheld meters during 30-second checks on the leeward side. In one Rita case, the main mast instrument froze at 30, while flags ripped and rails hummed. A mechanic lashed a spare on a 6-meter pole, read 42, and called for a halt. The small tool and 10 minutes of work prevented a bad lift in a bad hour. By the second day, communications and weather data still existed, but they arrived late and thin. Radios worked, but batteries drained. Satellites linked, but only in bursts. Radar painted, but not where people stood. Systems degraded together and forced choices inside short windows. That is why the flow of information marks the last early failure path. When the feed slows, every other margin narrows. The conclusion is simple to state and hard to live with. Survival now depends on the sum of limits rather than on any single fix. In the Northern Gulf between 2004 and 2010, survival on a stormed platform hinged on narrow gates measured in 15 minutes to 48 hours. The first cracks appeared in intake and rest. Potable water slipped when pumps gulped air, food handling slowed, and sleep thinned in rooms drifting toward 29 degrees Celsius with noise near 90 decibels. Work followed the weather, not the plan. Lifts paused above 20 meters per second, helidecks closed near 25, and boat routes of 150 to 200 kilometers went dark in 4 to 6 meter seas. Communication lagged as very small aperture terminal beams faded in heavy rain, and decisions reverted to short radio calls and local wind on the cheek. 3 lessons stand. First, what breaks first is basic support: water, food, and microclimate, because small stoppages compound before steel bends. Second, what degrades with time and fatigue is judgment across tools and tasks, as injuries, slips, and maintenance deferrals climb through the second day, while information arrives late and thin. Third, what remains outside control is the large frame, storm tracks energized by loop current eddies, liability under the Oil Pollution Act of August 1990, and the lag between real hazards and evolving rules from 2009 to 2016. Those edges define the day. Within them, a person lasts only as long as margins hold.